In this autopsy on abuse, I'll explore what is the essential core of abuse and how it ripples out in several different stages. And for this example, I'm going to refer to professional negligence or professional abuse, in this case with my therapist, Peter Sandhill. And it starts with a belief. And through the specific example, the idea is to get a sense of the archetypal levels of abuse. Because one of the most interesting aspects of abuse is its viral nature. The fact that, like a meme, abuse ripples out until a force equal or greater is able to retransform the energy that's locked up in abusive dynamics and release it to something, to a more positive structure. So the essence of abuse is in the word, the absence of respectful use. You know, if you think of engagement, and then you have the absence of that engagement, here we have abuse, the absence of use. Now, abuse begins, like so many things, with a belief and with a message. And so in any given abuse, the specific belief or message can vary. It can be something like, you are worthless. It can be something like, I'm worthless, and just unconsciously projecting that out on everyone else. It can be, you're not valuable enough. Could be the specific thing. That could be the whole inner conversation. I think I'm valuable enough for this, but in your eyes, I'm not quite valuable enough to do this, and this that would be healthy. You can think of the physical analogy of abuse of, if you take a hammer and you throw it in a smelting furnace and it loses its shape, that's abusing the hammer. If you use it to hammer nails of the right size, that's using the hammer. So in general, one of the overtones around an abusive belief or message is that you are not valuable. And that's one of the messages that I heard repeatedly in my own abuse dynamic with Peter Sandhill and later the Human Awareness Institute organization. So the first thing is that this belief ripples out. When someone who abuses us, or when we abuse ourselves, it begins with that belief, but it is amplified through a pattern of behavior that's consistent with the belief, that's consistent with the message. And so this begins for my abuser with a lack of study. It seemed as if I had studied psychedelic therapy more than my abuser, because I read several books, I was more cautious, I did a test, etc. He came in rolling, no questions, nothing, etc. And the message is that your psyche, in its most vulnerable state for a psychedelic experience, is not worth getting to know, is not worth studying. So an absence of intimacy, an absence of anything that, like, we really need to see and understand you. And that is a message that continues to the present, because there's never the question that says, gee, how have I impacted you? What would help you? These are all things that say that you matter, because we want to see you. We want to understand you. So this is the first expression and the first layer of abuse. Because if you fail to see, you fail to respect. To see again, re and spect. Spectacles, the Latin word to see. If you don't see, you cannot respect someone because you don't know what you're respecting or disrespecting because you didn't take the time to see. And so the lack of study, which is the first expression of the message, becomes the second or leads to the second wave of abuse, which is the lack of respect. Because when you come in flying blind, just like if you were to take out a gun, which is concentrated energy, and just randomly shoot it around, and you have blinders on, you may be breaking windows, damaging a dog, killing a child, but you have no idea because you don't see. And so the first is the message: you're not valuable enough to study for and to see. Therefore, I'm not going to see. Therefore, I'm going to interact and have impact without seeing. And this is a very important dimension of abuse because it's one of the ways that we can understand how we are in an abusive culture. Because we are in a culture in which most of our interactions are with people who do not see us and who relate to us more as a cog in a financial wheel than as someone to see and respect. As such, we don't get the message that we're valuable. We get the message that our role in the machine is valuable, that our money is valuable, etc. Well, this is also a message: you are not valuable. And so the abuse is contagious. It continues. Now, next is a wave called me before you. Now, whenever there's a conflict of interest, or much more importantly, an apparent conflict of interest, you then have, and I say an apparent conflict of interest because when you are a therapist and a healer, and you're making $175 an hour to heal someone, there is no conflict of interest between your, what's in the best interest of your client and what's in the best interest of you. If you do a good job healing, your reputation goes up, you get to get whatever ego strokes you might have around that, your client, most importantly of all, is benefited, and your role is justified. Because part of our social filtering out of what proceeds forward and what should die, as systems, as protocols, etc., is, does it work? Does it work? And so one's role is validated when we succeed. Now, the me before you dynamic comes in, filtered in this belief, you are not valuable. And so here's where we have the double standard, where my sense of self-image, that I'm the greatest, that's more important than me actually winning, or than you, the client, actually winning. So when another agenda, be it lust, be it looking good, be it not telling the truth, be it avoiding certain feelings, comes in, that agenda damages all concerned. But it's one of the ways that abuse is, it goes out in all directions. When you abuse your client, you abuse your own career, you abuse yourself, you abuse your family, you abuse your culture. When you abuse your culture, you abuse yourself, you abuse your family. When you abuse yourself, you abuse your client, etc., because it's as if you're a hammer. If you're a hammer and you abuse yourself and you get yourself all bent up and fractured and cut in half and then try and hammer in some nails, you're now not showing up for those nails the way that you would if you took care of yourself. If you're an alcoholic and you get drunk to a point where you can't take care of your pets, your self-abuse becomes the abuse of others. And there's a symmetry-making machine in the brain's integrity itself that wants to say that if that person isn't valuable because they don't look cool or they don't have money or whatever, then all people are not valuable unless they have money, unless they have this and that. And so the people are not actually valuable. The money is. And so when we drive, it's one of the ways that driving by homeless people in our own culture and in our own town is infecting the brain with a message that says that the human being isn't valuable. That's why we're not stopping the car. That's why we're not investigating. That's why we're not responding. You're not valuable. If those homeless people had money, they would be in fancy cars and homes, and then they would be valuable. The money's valuable, the human being isn't. And so there's this symmetry creating machine. But one of the things that's tricky about abuse dynamics is this thing called dissociative compensation. And so if I feel very small inside in some area, 1, that's being abused. 2, that as part of that abuse has been left dissociated and frozen in this state. Meaning there is a part of me is always there because no one is responding. I'm not responding to it. The therapy isn't touching it. So there's a part of me that feels very small and worthless. Now, the message that I'm small and worthless and unlovable is a devastating message. It levels the psyche because if you believe that, why get out of bed? Why grow? Why invest in retirement? Why have health care? Why do anything that suggests that you're valuable if you believe that you're worthless? And so what happens to these parts of us that get these strong, repeated messages that you're worthless, you're not valuable, you're not lovable, is in a culture that doesn't deal with abuse and doesn't deal with trauma, is that part collapses kind of off to the left. But there's fear. There's a drive to survive. We all have human needs. And so we then seek to adapt and compensate for this collapsed part of the psyche. And then we flip over to the other side that is grandiose. I'm better than other people, look at me, I'm the only person that matters, because there's this part in the psyche that's collapsed over here that if we listen to that part of us, we couldn't breathe, we couldn't move. Because if we're really not worthless, piece of shit, all of this, etc., then what are we doing existing? And it's like, I don't know, maybe I should just kill myself. And so we have this phenomena, in amongst human beings as being one of the few species on the planet's history to deliberately commit suicide and have the psychological pain behind that suicide to back it up, to make it an intelligent choice. To be able to look at one's life and say, I am in much more pain than I am joy and well-being. I don't want to be in much more pain than joy and well-being. And I'm in a sociopathic pattern in which I have no means of breaking out of this cycle. There's no one I can call and say, I'm in this cycle and I want bosses to start being nicer, I want people to make eye contact, I want this, and I want my life to be worth living. There's no one I can call, and so there's no place that I can go to change. And so the intelligent thing is to end my life because I can't change life. I don't have the empowerment to shift the reality around me to one that I want to live, to one that isn't so painful that I want to drink to slow it down, to tune it out, to one that is so so joyful, because it is a joyful life, because there are people that will help with our homeless and that will respond to this and that will put our environment ahead of just mindless greed, and there are people that can participate in that. And so this me before you dynamic is actually an adaptive persona. When the essential psyche is violated, and some part of me is left in a dark room in the psyche, imprisoned in the psyche, carrying the worthlessness, the terror, the trauma, the inadequacy that says, I'm going to give my feelings to you. You're not worth protecting as a child. You're not worth remembering. You're not worth empathizing with. Just go and feel all my feelings and all our family's feelings in this dark place. You don't deserve to exist. Your feelings don't deserve to be heard, etc., etc. And we have these dark places. It would be very unusual for someone in our culture not to have moments in time that are still frozen in those dark prisons. And these become then the terrors of our existence, because we don't want to look too deeply, we don't want to feel too deeply, because we might expand the inner awareness to a point where we came across one of those pockets of deep despair and desolation, loneliness and horror, where everything in our outer reality is shouting at us, saying, you don't matter, you don't matter, you don't matter, you don't matter. And your feelings about don't matter either. And we're so terrified of that we seek to create adaptive personas. Look at here, I want an addictive behavior here. I want to think this. I want to control my consciousness, my awareness, so that I don't have to look at this most painful of painful messages, this virus that penetrated my psyche and is reverberating with this message, I'm not valuable. And so the question, when an abuser is splitting the truth, meaning the truth is that everyone wins or no one wins, in the deepest sense of legitimacy and integrity. If a professional is hired and makes things worse, they're not really a professional. They're a con artist. Because you can't have a mathematics of sustainable relationship that says, I give you money and you promise to help and you make it worse, and then you want more money to make it even worse. It's like at some point there's an awakening that says, no, that's not how I want to spend my money. Well, then that's not how the job collapses with, the betrayal. And so there is no split in the interest of the healthy client and the healthy practitioner, of the healthy child and the healthy parent, of the healthy citizen and the healthy government. There is no split. However, when this untreated inner message of pain, shame, and loneliness, etc., is not dealt with, and a practitioner, a therapist, a parent, compensates for that small part in self with a grandiosity. You can kind of look at it like, just the geometry of it. If you have 10 pounds of weight and they're both like this and you're just walking, that's fine. But if the 10 pounds of weight gets off at a 45-degree angle, to be able to have some symmetry, you've got to take 10 pounds of weight off at this angle. And so this message of you are not valuable over here gets compensated for with an adaptive countermeasure that says, I am valuable and I'm more important. I'm more important. And often how this takes place as the victim becomes the abuser in the abuse dynamic is that the child, for example, cried desperately and needed love and empathy and was looked at with impatience and disgust as the father said, "Get that child out of here. I can't deal with this. Come on. Get him out of here. I'm trying to work. Doesn't everyone in this culture understand that my work is more important than the desperation of this infant?" And everyone acted consistently with that. The child was moved out and ignored. Everyone catered around, the guy that was preparing for work. And so that a part of the child takes in the message that my desperate need is worthless, has no value. That the way to be valuable is to be an important person going to work. So now it says, okay, I'm worthless. My feelings are worthless. But I still have a chance in this cult. If I become an important work person, then everyone will cater around me. So this becomes the internalized pattern of both violation and you're worthless, but also the remedy, which is I'm going to become like my abuser. I'm going to become someone who is disgusted with my sensitivity, who's disgusted with my needs, who's disgusted with vulnerability and dependency. It's just disgusting. And I'm going to push all that part in. I'm going to internalize the abuse, and I'm going to be important. I'm going to be the professional, the teacher, whoever it was that did the abuse. I'm going to become that person. Now, once I've become the person that's a believable rendition of that person, now I'm superior. Now you don't get to say that I'm still inferior. No. That's not the way it works. I am the professional. I'm the person with the Yale degree. I'm whoever it was that got away with the message of abuse to the child. That becomes the ideal. That becomes the deity. It's an interesting, dynamic in war dynamics that the loser at some level idealizes their conqueror. Now, this is a very interesting dynamic. It takes place in romantic relationships where the man or the woman who outwits, who is physically stronger, who outperforms, who wins the argument, is in some way sexually attractive to the person who loses. This is a very interesting dynamic in pickup psychology. It's called a neg. If you can get the woman, it's usually male pickup artists, if you can get the woman to feel bad about herself in a way that looks cool and witty, she will want to have sex with you because you're the victor she wants to be. She wants to be that witty. She wants to be that sarcastic. She wants to be that cool. She wants to be that sociopathic. She aspires to escape her own pain with becoming more cool. That's the whole definition of cool. The whole phenomena of a cult enamored with coolness is the aspiration to sociopathic dissociation, so that I can think nothing about the pain of other people. And the idea that this is an advancement comes when people feel crippled by the empathy that they feel and don't know how to respond to. And that just kind of goes on. And so coolness is like, if I can't solve my problems, at least I don't feel them. I'm cool. Doesn't faze me. Oh, that'd be so nice, because so many things faze me. I feel terrible being fazed all the time. And then you're the person who nothing fazes. Wow, I wish I could be like you. You become the deity, the idea of evolution. And that is always attractive. Competency in the direction perceived to be progress is attractive. Now, of course, the trouble with unbalanced cults and cultures is that these messages are often completely backwards. For example, in a traumatically illiterate culture, we don't understand that freezing and dissociation is actually going backwards. What it's saying is, I give up on having a healthy life and a healthy world. I accept the fact that I'm in a sociopathic environment that's in pain, and I'm going to anesthetize it with the deity of coolness. Meaning every time I see someone who's cool, i.e. who doesn't make a big deal of anything, who witty, who withdraws from anything messy and just says, that's not my problem, that's the person I want to be, because I can believe in that. That's a deity I can believe in, the cool dissociative deity. And it seems like all I have to do is buy some Nike sneakers, I need some, an Adidas cap, I need some, some this, I need to be jogging, because cool people, have, fit bodies. I need to be looking at my phone, and then I can be one of these people who's not embroiled in the incredible tragedy of an uneducated and unconscious psyche imploding self-destructively in a culture that doesn't know how to see it and doesn't know how to honor who we are as human and spiritual beings. And so this me before you dynamic comes out of the compensation. It's not a true persona. It's the learned adaptive persona of the inner child. And so me before you becomes the way to transfer the internalized shame and inadequacy of the original wound in the same way that it was originally transferred from the father, from the mother, from the older sibling to the child. Because, when a child is screaming, you could have a culture that said, let's all learn to love our child and find the vibe. Is there a hum? That if we all hum this song, our child is calm and feels joy and feels that our family is integrated. Is there a conversation that takes the buried secrets from the family vault, takes them out and lays them out so that the child is not hit psychically and emotionally with all these secrets that are not welcome? You see, the one of the interesting things with that psychics talk about is that what shows up in the psychic landscape is intense emotional energy. And behind every secret is an intense emotional energy. Because you have to spend energy to hide something. And the only reason you hide something is fear. And the only reason you're afraid of something is because you believe that that part of you is not valuable. That secret is not valued. So if it comes to light that you molested a child, you spend enormous energy to hide that, because there is the belief that if other people knew about it, that you would be hated, that you would not survive. And so there's a tremendous amount of fear based on a belief that that's not lovable in the general context of one's environment. Now, the belief that others can't love it symmetrically has an opposite side that says, I'm not lovable. And that is validated by the position of secrecy. I don't believe that I can talk about this part of myself and convince other people that it's lovable. And I'm not sure if I can keep it secret, but that's where I'm placing my bet. The bet that the most intelligent thing that I can do in a sociopathic and culturally illiterate culture meaning we may instinctively do our culture, but we haven't compared our culture objectively with even 10 other cultures. How about 100? How about 10,000 cultures that we've learned about in human history? How about examining the culture against objective, clearly desired values and really looking at what are all the ways that our culture could be and what are we doing and how close to our objective values. You know, we all want a more beautiful world. Now, we may have different styles and stuff, but we all want a more beautiful world. We all want a more efficient world in the sense that, you know, we're not trying to take a car drive and make it longer in the sense of could we drive, you know, we're driving 70 miles an hour. Could we drive 25 miles an hour and then maybe 10 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour? No, we appreciate efficiency, which ties in with excellence. You know, we really appreciate excellence, the beauty of excellence, the truth of excellence, the fact that things are much more graceful and efficient when they're beautiful. And they're much more beautiful when they're graceful and efficient. We look at, you know, the way the mechanic smiles at a Rolls-Royce engine or whatever. It's like, you just did such a nice job. You know, this engine could be here 100 years from now. I mean, there's a real beauty, and we appreciate that excellence. So there are these objective measures in Platonic values: beauty, truth, goodness. It just feels right, you know, to take care of a child rather than to cannibalize a child. Because that's what we could do. Preserve the planet, save time for the parents, have sex, and then eat the child. And, you know, get the stem cells and all that. That is one argument for, but it's like that doesn't feel to kill what's new and what could be, to kill possibility, to protect the old and the status quo. It doesn't have quite the same beauty, quite the same sense of goodness about it as sacrificing something in the present to honor vision. You know, we take a little bit of your money each time now and put it towards a retirement. So this me before you message always comes out of the wounded self. The wounded self that is terrified of facing this part in the psyche that got the full-on message you don't matter. And the full-on message that you will never matter. And the full-on message that everyone's in collusion to this because you're in a cult in which everyone agrees that crying babies are not as important as important business people, regardless of what they're actually doing. I mean, you could be going to work at Netflix to figure out how to get more people to binge watch Netflix. So we've got too much binge watching in media for the good of the people. But it's good for a few people, you know, at the top of Netflix. And so you may be leaving a child, you know, a screaming baby to go to work to figure out how to get more people in the public to watch more Netflix and not do their goals, not spend quality time with family, etc., and just zone out. And you'd say, well, that's not very intelligent. And, you know, and it ties in with these messages because one of the things that's interesting is, you know, a healthy human being says, I don't want to be used like that. I want to be used for something good, something, you know, that really matters, you know, like giving someone a massage who really needs a massage or talking with someone who needs to be heard. I want to be used for what we need in this culture. But you see, the wounded, valuable person understands that their humanity doesn't matter. Their humanity doesn't matter. Who has the money matters. Because they learned that from Dad with a Child when everyone pivoted around the money. Or whoever made the status, you know, the highest status thing. Or when you're more polite to someone because they're rich and the child observes that. I get shouted at, I get hit, but my parents who abuse me show respect to this person with money. And so the underlying drive to be treated well becomes the compensating obsession with being someone who has a lot of money. Once I have a lot of money, people will treat me with respect. Then I'll worry about other things, because that's a natural hierarchy, for child fixation. And so we then have the person abandoning the child to rush off and get money so that they can be treated with respect to start healing that underlying wound, that the core sense of humanity wasn't responded to. And this is why in the phenomena of psychohistory, the intersection of psychology and historical events, this is why in the kind of mass reproduction of evil, where you have this core pattern of that which is most innocent, most dependent, most beautiful, most potentiated in the child, being sacrificed by the abuser to protect the compensating message that says I'm more important because of this, this, and this. And how I show my importance is the same way my abuser abandoned me. That's how I show that I'm important. When I say that person doesn't matter as much as me and everyone agrees with me in some way, if I can walk in with $1 million checkbook and the poor people don't get the service that I get, then that's telling me, oh, thank goodness, I've achieved the status within the cult that says that I actually matter. But of course, the only people that really are fanatical about that, and this is why the most wounded people in a cult often become the most successful at climbing the cult hierarchy, is the most wounded people got the message that they didn't matter, but that the President of the United States mattered. Why did they matter? It's not because they had feelings. It's because they could blow people up with nuclear bombs or whatever. And so the people that felt the most disenfranchised and understood why, that they didn't matter, but their power mattered, their suit mattered, their money mattered, whatever bizarre thing the cult says matters more than a human being, they then obsess about that. And so the wounded small child becomes the one that's going to be at the top of the pyramid. And in doing so, it completes the abuse cycle. Because all cults, by their very nature, rank certain traits above the underlying essence of the humanity that gave those traits. Because all cultures contain a fear of the unknown. That is part of their defense against change. In that sense, every newborn child is an innocent probability spectrum that challenges the cult. And the cult's focus is to, much like the military with its breakdown and brainwashing protocol, to knock anything that has value out of the child, and in doing so, sublimate it to the existing dogma, to the existing structure that says, we'll all be happy. We'll all be happy if we're all white and we're all Christian and we're all Republican. And we all have guns, and we all we all make chauvinistic remarks about women, and they all have babies. And if we could just have that, and preferably meat eaters, get rid of the vegetarians, I guess you could be a little bit embarrassed of cripples or people like that, kill the homosexuals. If we could just all be that way, then we would be a happy family. Then we would all be okay, and it would be so wonderful. And it's just all these changes, different ways of speaking and praying and weird names for God. It's like, oh, it's so confusing. I'm so frightened of the unknown that let's isolate, let's get him out of here. And so the dogma, the familiar terrain, transcends the desire to see and be seen, transcends the value of the individual. So me before you is not actually a real game, but what it is the two compensating parts. When you have a me before you competition, there are two wounded people in the dynamic. One who got the message they were completely worthless unless they occupied these status positions. And the other person that got the message that they're completely worthless unless they occupy this status position. And so, for example, in US culture, the status is the talker is by definition more important than the listener. So there's competition to talk. But to escape the sense that I'm the worthless one, which is what's really going on, is the underlying thing is it's all fear. I don't want to be the one who feels invisible, worthless, low status, and unlovable, and that the other person goes away giving all those feelings to me and goes out feeling great about themselves because they were the one in the masculine pole. That's the essence of chauvinism. In a chauvinistic culture, everything is ranked by its masculinity or its femininity. So a woman who is more efficient and more of a leader is more valuable and higher ranking than a woman who says, gee, what would you like me to do, and is empathic. We say, oh, what a wuss, she'll never cut it in the real world. We want one of those, what's that? Yeah, we want Condi Rice. She's got plans. She's, go get her. She doesn't let her feelings get in the way. She's masculine. That's what we want. We want someone who leads and doesn't follow, who fights and doesn't run. In the fight flight of the sociopathic reptilian brain function, the flight is feminine. The fight is masculine. The speak is masculine. The listen is feminine. Up is masculine. Down is feminine. Mind, masculine. Body, feminine. That's why you can say, well, isn't she a cute bimbo? Oh, so good to fuck. But, he's the brains. And we all know that brains are more important because we all subscribe to the chauvinism within our cult. There's nothing objective that says that looking at beauty is less intelligent than studying mathematical equations. It's different contexts, different talents, etc. But there's this deep sense of we all know because we're a cult. The root word of every culture. We're a cult that does things our way. And thus the original wound. Every human being is a unique probability field coming into a cult in which they will be sociopathically and cruelly cut down mentally, emotionally, physically, legally, at every level if they don't follow the cult. The law in the cult will lock you up or kill you if you don't follow the cult. Now, you could have a very good argument about the fact that, well, you believe that you should be able to drink in public because let's not hide what's going on, or you believe that two 16-year-olds should be able to have sex together without being called child pornographers for having photos of their own play. You believe that. It doesn't matter. A cult will haul you off to jail for transgressing its laws. And the taboo laws are the social laws. If you transgress this, nobody will invite you to the party. And so your sense of self-esteem and sense of love and belonging in your hierarchy of human needs collapses. And if you do this, nobody will do business with you. It used to be if you had, Rastafarian, hair, it didn't matter whether you had a Yale degree or whatever. We don't like your type. What's that? People who break the rules. What's that? Well, you've twirled your hair like this and not cut it like this, so we want nothing to do with you. We don't care who you are as a human being. Your hair doesn't look right. Your skin doesn't look right, so we don't want anything to do with you. And so this is the wound. When the soul understands that I as a human being do not matter, because these sons of bitches who say they love me, they'll put me in jail, they'll kill me, they'll bankrupt me, they'll hate me, they won't invite me, they'll humiliate me, they'll ignore me, they'll beat me, they'll traumatize me unless I follow their fucking rules. I don't matter. All that matters is whether I'm able to climb the cult hierarchy. And everyone's competing in that dynamic because that deep sense of needing to matter, which never truly gets answered by climbing the cult hierarchy, but there's the promise. That's what the cult holds out to every person. It says, just go along with the system, and you'll be happy, and you'll be loved, and you'll be famous, and you'll have money, and that's all you need. Your humanity, your spirituality, don't worry about that. You'll have sex, you'll be popular. People who don't know you and understand you will think you're wonderful. You just have to have a haircut like this and a talk like this and have these bits of paper and those bits of paper and these numbers after your name and these bank accounts in Switzerland. Oh, it'll be wonderful. Just do it. And that's a cult hierarchy. So the me before you dynamic is who's going to feel that small sense of loneliness and unlovability, and who's going to get to be the grandiose, wonderful person. So, for example, within chauvinism, the rescuer is high status. The one being rescued is low status, the damsel in distress. And so, the narrative within a chauvinistic dialogue is, oh, my wonderful hero. There's no why wonderful damsel. But you see the chauvinism because the science doesn't hold up. How can you have a hero without someone who needs rescuing? You can't. If there's no one that needs rescuing, you have no heroes. So if you want to be a hero, you're dependent on someone to rescue, which means they're really important. If they vanish and won't let you rescue them, well, you're toast. How's your heroism today? No one wanted you. No one needed you. It's like, oh, I'm back to feeling miserable and small. No, the hero needs a damsel in distress, male or female. The hero needs that, which means they're equal. The damsel needs the hero needs the damsel. That's the reality. But you see, the cult plays this nice little game. It blocks over so much of the underlying mathematics of polarity and dynamic and just makes up stuff. It says, if you're a hero, you risk your life, so-and-so was up in the building, you are important. Now, the person who was rescued, they're not important. They're just nothing. They're just weak, women usually. Weak women. Of course, they need a manly man to rescue me from my burning building. And it's like, no, it's the other way around. Men in a sociopathic culture don't know how to feel good about themselves and open up their hearts unless they go into extreme chauvinistic polarity in the rescuing dynamic. So it's not that women need men to rescue them. Men need to rescue women in a sociopathic cult in order to feel good about themselves and secure enough to open up and love. And women need to be loved and men need to be loved. And so many men won't open up and do that just in a straight equal dynamic. Yeah, you don't need me, I don't need you, but I'm just going to open up my heart because it's fun. You see, we're too dumb to do that in a chauvinistic cult. And so the man needs the student, the bimbo, the sense of grandiosity to feel secure enough to compensate from that terrified, wounded part in youngness. Men's egos are much more fragile than women's, because the feminine gives birth to the man. The first experience of feminine energy is that the woman is the entire world. And so it's very logical. And then women with, the whole biological menstruation or giving birth and stuff, there's so much sense of underlying mathematical power, because every man is born out of a woman, that the cult has to do this major recompensating in order to get us into this framework in which in which you can collude to get everyone to make these endless put-downs to women to compensate for the tremendous majesty and terror that is the birth process of coming into a new dimension, a new world, through the feminine, through the majesty, the generosity, through the pain. A woman often will go through a level of intimacy and orgasm or pain in birth that men are so shamed in our culture for feeling that they've never felt that once. And women are kind of allowed to, because we say that feelings are automatically inferior to thoughts, right? Why? You can't back that up scientifically. That's the difference between science and a cult. So this me before you dynamic is really about cultural ranking. So if a therapist interrupts the patient, if a therapist imposes on the client, they're in a dominance dynamic within a cult hierarchy. It's not real. If you don't know what you're talking about, you're much more intelligent to shut up. But why do idiots blurt out the most? It's because the cult says that if you prevail, if you get the last word in, you won. Well, what if the last word is complete bullshit and gibberish? It doesn't matter. You won. My chiropractor hung up the phone on me while I was explaining kind of some of the odd mixed messages I was getting around the abuse. It's like he's a chiropractor on the one hand who's releasing the terror stored in my muscles. So I get terrified. What? You are not valuable. That's a terrifying thought. I get terrified. Some parts of me still in that reality, and I can't release it directly, and so I need the help of a chiropractor. But if the chiropractor increases and escalates the terror that you're not valuable, but keeps releasing the muscles produced by that terror, it doesn't work. There's a heart, mind, body system. And, what was happening was me talking about the sexual abuse by Peter Sandhill and the supplemental abuse by Peter Rengel, who's one of this guy Matt's clients, made Matt feel small because Matt didn't know what to do. But in his childhood abuse history, not knowing what to do means you're not lovable. That the only part of him that gets real love and value is this part that knows what to do and is competent and is masculine and da-da-da. And so that part knows what to do or appears to. But I'm inviting him into terrain that he doesn't know what to do. And so he tries to do one-upmanship. He ignores feelings. He makes little jokes. He tells me I'm not seeing him clearly. He does this. And then when that doesn't work, because I piece together the pattern, he hangs up. Why? So I couldn't have the last word. Little 6-year-old Matt doesn't, he's dad's winning. I wanted to say all that, and he's saying all that. And now he, a patient? See, I was supposed to be the doctor. I'm supposed to be superior, the wonder worker and stuff, and they're telling me what to do with feelings? We all know feelings don't matter in this culture, blah, blah, blah. And so bang, I've got you. You can't say anything. How can you feel valuable if I hung up on you and I'm the doctor? How can you do it? And it's like it's difficult until you realize, just another person trapped in the cult, another person trapped in their wound, another person trying to flip inferiority into superiority. And of course, it's so much easier to listen. When you say to Matt, I'm feeling 7, 8, 9 out of 10 pain, because you won't acknowledge my feelings. To just say, I'm really sorry. Tell me about that. What could I do to acknowledge your feelings? See, but that would mean taking the low status position. I have to switch from being the authority to the learner. But in chauvinism, the authority is so much more valuable than the learner. So I don't want to do that. My whole point in being a professional was to finally be the one that people would value. But I'm still not. People, they're not respecting me. What do I have to do? How much do I have to communicate that I'm the one? And so then Matt started doing the time dynamic where he's late. So if you keep someone else waiting, the message is, I'm more important. And that's why one of the power games in chauvinistic diplomacy is that, the emperor or the pope gets to keep people waiting for hours, right? If you're the head of a company and you're some supplier, you're the monopoly buyer for the company, they can just keep you waiting. And this is, of course, in Harvey Weinstein's saga, to create more Oscars than any other studio by bribing, of course, all the different and rigging the Oscar committees and stuff. And then be able to say, I'm your guy and I can sign $1 million deal for you tonight. You just have to stroke my penis, watch me masturbate, feel coerced into sex, you just have to do what you don't want to do because that makes me feel valuable. The fact that you did it. See, I used to be the one feeling like I couldn't do anything and they had all the power. Now I've got the power. I've made the money, I've done this, that this cult wants. This cult values this money more than me. It doesn't matter that I'm ugly. It doesn't matter that I need loved. None of that matters. I want to be valued. And this is the best way to get it. To look completely disheveled and ugly and sweaty and all this, and feel that you will do whatever I want you to do. See, I want it to be done. I'm the dominator, right? That's the masculine side. I want this and you agree. That makes me masculine. And that makes you feminine. That makes me more important because I've got more money than you. I've got more power than you. I'm more masculine than you. I can shape your career more than you can shape my career. But the price is you've got to do something that would be absolutely abhorrent to you and to let me know that I matter. Who's willing to play the game? If you don't, get out of here. I'll find some other people who have been brainwashed into believing that money and power and fame are more important than your inner truth. Because that's the essence of chauvinism. That's the essence of chauvinism. Now, paying for abuse adds particular emphasis or weight to the message, you are not valuable, because in issues of scamming, one of the things that, or one of the fallouts of chauvinism is there's actually a certain amount of cultural admiration to the scammer who gets away with it. We shame the loser who goes to jail, but there's a certain expectation that if someone is successful and rich or a ladies' man, etc., that they're getting away with it. And so within the chauvinistic framework, a scammer has a certain amount of higher ranking. Now, as soon as that's caught and that's displayed, that flips, and the scammer becomes low ranking. But the scammer that gets away with it, there's a message that you weren't valuable enough to protect, you weren't valuable enough to prepare for, you weren't valuable enough to refund the money, as the scam or abuse comes to light, that basically you're the kind of person who should have to pay for substandard service. And so, there is also, in a social context, a certain message that the person paying is lower status than the person receiving the money. So, for example, in a therapy session where the therapist doesn't want to be friends, doesn't want to talk with you, wouldn't meet with you except if there's money, there can be a message of you're only worth talking to if you pay me. And this can be one of the subtexts around vulnerable feelings, meaning when we're in a cultural environment in which the most sensitive, the most vulnerable, the most meaningful feelings that a person has is exported by the culture into a paradigm of you should go pay someone for that. If you're really angry about homelessness in your town, well, we don't want to do anything about that and stuff, but go pay a therapist. They'll listen to your anger. You'll feel better, maybe forget about the homeless, etc. And the therapist won't tell anyone. Or if you're hurt that you were cheated on, well, we don't really want to hear about your hurt feelings. Of course, people are hurt. That just go take that to a therapist. We don't want to listen to it. But there are these people over there that if you pay them enough money, they'll listen to it, and you won't embarrass yourself by having feelings. And so that's, within the cultural framework of chauvinism, the most emotional person is the most feminine person. And we all know about people who are too emotional. But how do we know that is the question. Like, how is it that we don't have this term too sociopathic, too unemotional, and we roll our eyes? How is it that we don't kind of make little jibes at people who are so sociopathic that, with neighbors in crisis, with homeless people in their town, they feel absolutely nothing and say, well, that's too unemotional. If people are in trauma around you and you feel nothing, and if you're so disintegrated that you don't change anything, isn't that too unemotional? And of course, when we have chronic, painful, traumatic patterns in the culture that don't change for decades, one could make a legitimate argument if there is too much feeling and if there is too little feeling, and you can't have one without the other. You can have too much salt and die, and you can have too little salt and die. There's the question of what's the midpoint. And every culture decides what's its midpoint. If you can eat a pizza and take a beer and watch starving children and say, oh, interesting, starving children over there, and next, and next, and next, and I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to get the adrenaline rush from someone else's suffering to feel a little bit alive in my life. I'm not going to change. Obviously, chronic problems require that level of desensitizing. And one could even say that listening to a bit of a news item, without taking an action is training the psyche, training your sense of identity that I'm the kind of person that hears about pain and stuff and doesn't do anything. I'm interested, I want to watch and see who's suffering, because that's typically what hooks people into the news. What's the most adrenaline-producing thing? Well, it's car crashes and scandals and this. It's not 10 million trees grew a foot taller this last month. That doesn't make it on the news. Why not? It's far more interesting to our planet's survival. It just doesn't wake me up while I'm eating my pizza. The pizza's slowing me down, dumbing me down. I need some adrenaline out there, some horror flick or some news item to make me feel alive. So, if that's the pattern, that I use other people's suffering for my, stimulation, couldn't we say that people are feeling a lot, too little? But every scam artist is saying at the core, my needs, to feel important, to feel like I got one over on you, to da-da-da-da-da, my needs are more important than your feelings. My needs are so much more important than you. And I'm better than you because I got away with it. You were dumb. You believed me. And so I'm smart. I'm smarter than you. And in the cult chauvinism, of course, being smart is high-ranking. Being trusting, oh, that's stupid. That's what stupid people do. They're gullible. They actually believe that when someone says, hey, I want to help you, they want to help you. What fools, right? What fools. Don't they understand we're living in a dominating, chauvinistic culture where anyone who can get away with something will the fool? And so we actually shame the person who was gullible. And one of the interesting things around sexual abuse in our culture is that there is so much blame/shame of the victim that many victims are more concerned for their own image of coming forward around abuse, because the culture is going to say, well, what kind of an idiot gets abused by their therapist, or couldn't pick this, or lets their parent rape them 200 times. I mean, what kind of idiot does that? I'm smarter than that. I would never do that because I'm high ranking. And so part of this dynamic, and we do it in government as well. The United States government in many ways is a global bully. And when WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden points out some of the breaches in law or some of the tremendous atrocities of getting these young teen boys hyped up on nicotine or amphetamines or opiates and numbing them out and kind of interfacing with other human beings through these video game interfaces with drones or otherwise. Of course, this is completely dehumanizing, as in the Reuters report, and that's the bit that comes out. And of course, there's a massive attack on transparency. There's a massive attack on transparency that reveals this sociopathic ethic. There's no attack on the actual institutions that are continually pushing out in these sociopathic ways with incredible human collateral damage to real human beings. But money ties in with all of that. If you won't see me or won't help me unless I give you money, one of the things that's communicated there in this worthless dynamic is that you're not worth it. Your money is worth it. And so that can be a subtext message. The scamming aspect, of course, you're just someone to be scammed. And this happened with Peter Sandhill, denying everything that there was anything wrong, and then denying that there was anything to apologize for. And so when I wanted to explain to him what he should apologize for, he demanded that it be in a paid session. He said, if you want an apology or to have me empathize with you, you've got to pay me $175 an hour to listen to some of the ways my sexual abuse hurt you. Because otherwise, I don't want to deal with it. It's like, unless you're willing to let me be the innocent, grandiose healer, I don't want to engage. I'm only willing to engage in this vertical dynamic with you because you are not valuable. You're not worth an off-the-clock apology for egregious betrayals and abuse, etc., that are rippling out. It's just not worth it. The money is more important than you are. But also what the money symbolizes. You see, because if Peter Sandhill refunds the money, what he's also saying is, maybe I don't have a right to take money and then consistently abuse you. Maybe that's not okay. Maybe there are other situations. Patterns like this don't just generally show up with one person. There's probably other people that I've abused as well because I thought this was great with you and you want a refund, but does that mean I should give other people a refund? I want the money. The money is more important than you are. Now, the damaging action out of this pattern of I'm more important than you are shows up in ways, for example, when Peter Sandhill ignored a dream, ignored my comment about writing to the community about suicide, ignored my strong wish to take a very low dose as a new form of treatment. I've never been drunken before. I've never been high. I've never taken a drug. I haven't even taken an aspirin. And and part of early childhood trauma is you want to feel more in control, because the worst thing in kind of the whole psychic landscape is feeling traumatic pain while surrounded by people who are putting their own concerns to look good, to feel good, etc., ahead of that pain. So they're going to keep doing it, and they're not going to repair it in order to bolster the sense of grandiosity. When a 6-year-old is thrown under the bus repeatedly, and you can even see this, I talked about, the way abuse spreads out, and the way that the victim who got the message that you as a human being are not worthwhile because you don't have these traits. For example, my father used to humiliate me, along with everyone else in the family, consistently. And the basis of his superiority, the reason it was okay, was that he was articulate and a 6-year-old wasn't. You see, so his 6-year-old was dumb, and so he could talk about how dumb I was and this and that and endlessly do that. But deep down, you understand that he's a human being, you're a human being. Why is he superior to me? He's superior to me because he can articulate. He can articulate in such a way that makes him smart. And if he's smart in a chauvinistic culture, he's better than. So he's better than my mother because she's dumb. And he's better than the rest of the family because they're dumb. And so even in that situation, you can see my strategy forming, like, how do I get out of this trapped sense that I'm completely worthless and that everyone around will enjoy my humiliation endlessly because I as a human being am not valuable. Now, what that's also saying is that my father as a human being is not valuable, and that's his wound. That's the wound that an alcoholic mother and a father with PTSD from World War II gives. And that's the message that my grandfather's country gave to him. We are going to draft you for World War II. We need you to go and risk your life. Now, the fact that you've developed PTSD, the fact that you can't relate to your feelings after the war, we don't care about that. You're not worth that. We need to look good in Washington, and so we're going to do a nice little parade. We're going to talk about this, but we're not going to deal with the fact that you're now abusing your son, my father, because you've been induced into a psychological trauma, and then you've been patted on the head as if it never happened. See, this is where so it starts on this cultural level, migrates down to my grandfather, and then my father, of course, feels completely worthless because he couldn't stop being hit. He couldn't stop being shamed. And when he turned to his alcoholic mother for nurturance, she had complete disgust for her own feelings and for his. So he looked around in the culture and developed something that the cult would rank highly, articulating talent. So a very unhappy, miserable little boy growing into someone considered smart. So what does he do with that smartness? He makes everyone else feel small around him. And, I notice that is a tendency. That is an aspect of my personality when I feel the smallest and I feel helpless and hurt, and the Human Awareness Institute says it's not their issue that their own staff member sexually abuses a client. That's not their issue. Like, how small can you make someone feel? It's not their issue. An apology isn't their issue. So they don't apologize. And they don't acknowledge it as an issue. And they cover it up. They disconnect me from emails because I might tell someone. So their secret is me before you. I need you to exist in a world where we're great people. And the way that you actually feel and the way that this has impacted you, it doesn't matter. You don't matter. Now, of course, where do I turn? I turn to articulating talent. I turn to reading books. I turn to learning the data. I turn to learning the law, etc., so that I can point out the ridiculousness of the Human Awareness Institute. You see, it changes the me before you equation. Please take the abuse, pay us for the abuse, be silent about the abuse, and apologize for inconveniencing us. So that's the one-sided message of you don't matter. And then coming back and say, but I do matter, you see. And within a chauvinistic context, that coming back has to be in some way that the cult ranks highly. So if I win a major legal settlement and get $10 million, then suddenly I matter, you see, because the cult values winning, and the cult values legal settlements, and the cult values law settlements altogether. If you have feelings, they don't matter. But if you convict a criminal, that matters, and suddenly you gain ranking. And so you can see the competition of two wounded factions. My father feeling completely insignificant as a human being, trying to compensate and feel significant as a dominating, violent, sociopathic, humiliating bully, using language and this and that and the other, and everyone around him saying, oh, he's so smart because he can talk. So my winning that little tension with my father, like, who's going to feel small? Who's going to be left carrying the tiny, horrible feeling that I don't matter? Well, at that point around 14, when I could anticipate my father's argument and kind of, plug the hole he was trying to throw me into, by going a little bit ahead of his, he would set these word traps, that would endlessly drive you into helplessness and despair. And when you were absolutely miserable and in tears and humiliated, he would smirk and go and find his next victim. And that's the way an incredibly hurt, powerless boy, masquerading as a very smart, rich and successful man, goes about trying to get his little boy out of that little trap. And so, in the in the worst points of my smallness, I do exactly the same thing. Using that tool. That was the tool my father used to dominate me. And my family gave me the message that I didn't matter, that his smarts mattered. So I had to develop smarts in order to matter. And now I've got smarts. Now I've got social recognition as well, saying, oh gosh, you're really intelligent. You're smart here. You're very da-da-da-da. It's like I'd trade all of that to be in a culture where human beings where vulnerable and terrified little boys and little girls could cry and express tonally the horror that they are being asked to deal with, and where rather than being shut up and manipulated and boxed in and hit and traumatized and marginalized and addicted to distraction, go play your video games, we don't want to hear what you are feeling, to live in a world where things would actually pivot around and you got the message. You don't matter because you're smart, you matter because you're a human being. You don't matter because you're rich, you matter because you're a human being. That is the only healing antithesis. That is the only healing antithesis to this message, you don't matter. Because to behave in a pattern of action that prioritizes the securing of social rank and money ahead of human beings is to affirm and participate in the widely held cultural belief that human beings are not as valuable as their money or as their social status. Why were the children bought up in the Catholic priest dynamic? Why did the Vatican have an entire office of taking pedophile priests, taking them to a resort where they could meet other pedophiles and learn better techniques, and then go back into unsuspecting communities such that the Catholic priests could profitably sustain a 5% pedophilic statistic amongst its priests, and shame and marginalize every one of the boys that tried to talk about it. And boys were targeted because it was less believable, meaning than girls. Little girls and priests and stuff, that was something that parents were a little bit more sensitive to, but they found if they could molest boys would be too ashamed in a culture that shames boys for feelings but doesn't shame girls for feelings as much. Boys would be too ashamed. And then they targeted in particular a group of deaf boys in boarding school so they would feel even more powerless and disenfranchised. Because when you're trying to transfer a feeling of inadequacy at the core from the inside to the out, the key is to find someone receptive to that. And what better than someone who's been sent off to boarding school with a culturally shamed disability. We have always teased disabled people in our culture because when you measure value by competency only, then they have a reduction in competency. And so every child that's gotten the message that if they get an A in school, they're worth something, but if they get a C or fail, that they're going to be mercilessly mocked. They've gotten the message, you don't matter, your grades matter. You don't matter, my reputation matters. I don't give a shit if you like this. Get a fucking A. You're embarrassing me. You don't matter, I matter. And this is, of course, how grown-ups with unresolved worth and all of that issues behave. And so it's the way that our culture behaves. The damaging action, of course, does damage. In a physical sense, if you go into a surgeon's office and they cut off the wrong arm, that's pretty major. In psychological and related damage, there's a whole variety of things. We all influence one another. And so the most dangerous thing is when you pay someone money, and this is another reason that it's an important layer in abuse. When you pay someone money, you are saying that on a conscious level, you believe they will help you. And to verify that equation, just ask yourself, if anyone said, I'd like you to pay me money, and I'm going to hurt you. Well, other than BDSM dominatrix type settings where people feel a pleasure in being shamed or in reenacting childhood abuse, nobody takes that deal. If I come to you and say, hey, I'm a landscaper and I am going to totally destroy your landscape, you say, go to hell. I'm not paying you for that. And I'll call the police if you do it for free, right? But in this psychological arena, we're psychologically illiterate in many ways. And so it comes down to, do you believe in? What is it you believe in? When someone says, I'm really great at this, as Malcolm Gladwell talked about in his recent book, Default to Stranger, we default to truth. We default to verbal truth. So when a bunch of people like at the Human Awareness Institute all come to me and say, hey, Peter's this great guy, we're a great guy, we're committed to creating a world where everyone wins. We're committed, and this is the room of love. The default is to truth. Unless people have been so abused, to a point where, they have no trust in anyone, including themselves. The default is, well, let's give them the shot. And the money locks that in to a certain degree, because here's the stuck point when you've paid money to be abused. Particularly in a culture that ranks smartness or shrewdness as, if you're smart and you're shrewd, you're a valuable person. If you're dumb, well, you're not even worth talking about. You're not important. You're dumb. So when you are scammed, legitimately or otherwise, meaning there's plenty of scams that go on with just incredible ignorance on all sides. It's still a scam in the sense that you've paid money to have things made worse because you and no one else really knew what was going on, and so you just did what other people were doing, and it made things worse. That's abuse. But in this dynamic where there's this gray area, it's like, if I'm walking out feeling emotionally worthless and small because every time I say, someone asks, how are you doing? And I say, I'm really wrestling with sexual abuse and it's really overwhelming and I don't really know where to go around that. And they say, okay, bye. What they're saying is, yeah, that's your thing, but you're not valuable enough to actually see, can I help you? Do you know what to do here? Gee, that sounds really difficult. I'm sorry. That matters to me. That matters to me. And so in this constant assessment, one of the things that's going on in every interaction is the abuse survivor is coming away with the message they matter more than they thought they did before the interaction, or they matter less. And often, because we don't teach people how to differentiate consciously, we don't teach psychology because of course you don't matter. Your psyche is just about the most fundamental subject in the history of education. This is who you are or who you think you are. That's not worth studying? No, that's not worth studying. Algebra, that's where it's at. When did you use algebra, Dad? Oh, I don't use algebra, but we ask everyone to learn algebra and not to talk about personal things like their own psyche and all that, because that makes us all feel comfortable in our ignorance and stupidity. And so, how about that? And so there's a constant question. Do you believe that I'm valuable? And when we pay money, what I'm saying, when I pay Peter Sandhill money, is I'm saying I believe you. And I'm saying, I think you can help me. And I believe that you want to help me. And I believe that you will put my interests ahead of your own, lust, desire to just run off and spend the money. I'm saying, I believe that you'll put that first. Now, the question then is, if that picture. It's like someone who puts me first actually hears and pays attention to my feelings, but you're not doing that. As the divergence between what I would call this me before you, a kind of coping mechanism, an addiction. The me before you comes out of this need to overcompensate for the unresolved inadequacies inside. Otherwise, it's us together. I mean, on a mathematical level, partnering, and it's all win-win, or there's no, you don't grow a business by scamming someone for the rest of your life. It's no fun. Usually it blows up in your face at some point. So the mathematics say that you want to focus on win-win. But the ego dynamics of I've got to feel superior to you, and most importantly, I've got to not be thrown into my unknown or my feeling of where I'm inadequate in any way. That's the bottom line. You cannot make me look bad, because if you make me look bad, I'll go back into that part that feels worthless, and I'm not willing to feel that. And so I'm going to attack and fight, etc. I'll now use the dominance in the hierarchy of I'm the professional. And the pivot here, and this is what's very difficult for the breakup in the victimization abuse cycle, is we generally do blame the victim at some level. That certainly happened to me, when I took the abuse to Ann Watts at the Human Awareness Institute, who had recommended Peter Sandhill to me and who had helped to train him. She said, that man is not safe when she listened to the recording of the abuse. She said, that man is not safe. But then she turned around and recommended him again without disclosing the abuse to other people in the community. So she's saying, you, the rest of the community, are not worth protecting. Dane and I are keeping a secret that knows that my protege is not safe. But we're not going to tell anyone else, because that would damage the money structure of our organization and da-da-da. And that money structure, it's more important than everyone really understanding what went on. And it's not, and the fact that we acknowledge that he hurt you doesn't mean you should get a refund for the money, etc. Because do we really have to pay for our mistakes? Are you really worth that much? Maybe it's just too much bother. Maybe you're just not worth it. You weren't worth training for. You weren't worth protecting from Peter. You weren't worth an apology, etc., etc. And now we don't want to deal with it either, because you're just not that valuable. We regret it. We'll go that far. We have some regrets here. But that's about as much. And we're not necessarily doing that because you're valuable. Maybe we have to say something so you won't sue us. And so there again, money is more important. So if you bring in the legal situation, then you have this dynamic where the money, oh my gosh, they could easily sue us for millions of dollars. Let's give them a refund of a few $1,000s now to get, and that should be enough. That's better than spending a few $1 million. So it's the money speaking again, not that you were valuable enough to do that originally. You as a human being and your feelings mattered enough that we volunteered an apology, that we volunteered a refund. Now, the going back to this little box here of the abuse survivor. So the abuse survivor has gotten another big dish of communicated actions that say you don't matter. And the only thing they've got, the only thing that I've got in our culture, because, in talking about the abuse, it's not like anyone does something about it. It's just like, well, we don't want to talk about that. That's one of our cult's taboos. We like to protect our abusers. And we call people who keep talking, they're snitches, they're negative. They should look at the positive. Anne said, you seduced Peter. I'm in a psychedelic-induced state of an overdose pushed by Peter Sandhill. and on 2 substances in a therapeutic session at $175 an hour, lo and behold, I fall in love with a man for the first time in my life. Well, it's completely predictable if someone knows what they're doing. But Anne and Peter don't know what they're doing, and so they say, well, you seduced. I mean, what do you expect, Dane? He's just a guy, he's human like everyone else. You seduced him in your session. It's your fault. You should be apologizing for seducing your therapist while high on your first overdose, pushed by your therapist. Because, that makes you look small rather than us look small. The idea that Peter could actually say, the statistics of therapists having sexual relationships with their clients are about 500 to 1 being positive, meaning there are seduced therapists all over the country who, amongst their many patients, find some more attractive than others, and particularly amongst childhood abuse survivors, the child learns that their dignity is not valued, but their sex is valued. So they're trying to get power and ranking within a cult that values their body more, and the lust factor, the adrenaline and all that, more than it values them as a human being. So if they're feeling worthless and small, they may play a thing with their therapist to say, hey, how about it, and enjoy the sense that, I'm not here all alone feeling small and worthless. I can make the therapist feel uncomfortable, which is how I've felt my whole life, and nobody's done anything about it. And so, that happens all the time with sexually abused girls, because they learned that they were dumb and stupid and hit and minimized and discriminated against constantly since birth. And then suddenly their dad is interested in their body. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's a mixed thing. Finally, I have a little status. It's because dad wants to fuck me. Well, you learn that. You learn this is a cult that obsesses about the drug of sex, not the human experience of love. So you might even learn a little bit about sexual physiology in school, but you won't learn anything at all about love. What is it to be loving to another human being? And one of the deepest things one can do to be loving is to heal this disease, this deep-seated virus that was planted repeatedly by country, by cult, by family, and then by other people infected by the virus that say, you don't matter. I don't matter, so you don't matter, and you don't matter, so I don't matter, so I've got to compensate and pretend that I do and be superior to you. And so there's all this thing we're all trying to heal at some level, this deep wound. Now, of the 500 sampling of therapists that succumb to letting their clients pay them to get social ranking in the therapeutic session by fucking the therapist, there's maybe 1 out of every 500, if that, where the patient benefits in some way. Now, the therapist gets their lust fix and usually will hurriedly dump that client and push them away or find themselves in all kinds of things, because now the therapist is afraid of themselves, which makes them afraid of their patient, and they're trying to maintain a power dynamic. I'm the doctor, I'm Dr. So-and-so. You have to refer to me as, no, you're my fuck buddy who can't keep his dick in his pants and is scared of me. No, I've got to do it. And so there's all this stuff, and of course the patient is expected to pay, because otherwise it would be a glaring omission. Why is this patient not paying? I abuse them. What am I going to do? I can't tell anyone. But this statistic never works out, for the patient. And so a good therapist says, of course I'm attracted to you. You're a lovely human being. It's much more interesting than sitting here taking notes. To have sex with someone as gorgeous as you are, of course I'm attracted to you. But here's the thing. You matter. You matter. And so I'm not going to roll the dice with a 99% chance that you end up fucked up, more fucked up, that you end up walking away from here but reinforcing this belief that you don't matter, that your body does. And this can happen in relationship as well, by the way. There is a ton of consensual abuse because we don't understand what abuse is. You know, some human being feels completely worthless as a human being, but they happen to have an Adonis or, you know, a Aphroditic body, and they attract all this interest, and their whole status comes from the management and manipulation of that attention to be used towards social ranking because they don't feel like they have any on the inside. And they'll let this high status person fuck them to gain social status. It's not that they want that. It's not a feeling of love. It's just a deep compensating message in a very unhealthy culture. And we're fine with that because we're psychologically illiterate. Because that's the one subject you'll never study in school is psychology and mythology and cultural design. I mean, just think of the fits that our power structure has at all levels at the idea of children learning, here's what they do in Denmark that gives everyone an education, a healthcare system, a great job, retraining, paid maternity leave for both parents, beautiful parks, fabulous architecture, retirement, disability. This is how they are in Denmark, but we over here, what we like to do with our homeless is pass laws that say they can't sleep in their cars, and then we spend more money chasing them by the police than we do to put them in a simple small house. That's what we do in this country, but this is how they do it over here. And then over here, they have festivals that allow you to grieve your dead with deep emotions that minimize the amount of fallout and trauma. But over here, we sit around stony-faced, dab a little handkerchief, we all wear black, we suppress our emotions, and we say that a somber, unemotional funeral is dignified. And then we get stuck in grief and we don't know how to navigate it as a culture. That's what we do over here. But over here, they sing, they parade the dead up and down for 3 days, they lament, there are grief things, there are groups around the grieving that contain them when they need to get all the stuff out of their system, and they scream. And then after 3 days, they feel spent and they get on with their life, and everyone got to witness the power of emotion. That's what they do over here. But over here, we have our little things where we try and pretend death never happened. We call it a failure. We keep people in miserable states as long as possible, and then keep up the fight, is keep suffering and spending lots of money to hang on, barely able to breathe for another day. That's what we do here. You see, the cult falls apart because it's a house of cards, built on secrecy, built on silence, built on ignorance, built on trauma. You stray outside these lines and actually start thinking, damn, we're going to get you. And so the damaging action is things like, in this case it's me telling Peter Sandhill, I think, based on my dream, based on this and this, that, I think that one psilocybin mushroom would be more than enough. And him saying, no. I know best. You see, I'm the expert. I may not have read any books. I may not be able to hold an honest relationship with my wife. I may not be able, but I know. And you are going to take 3 mushrooms. And see, the trick with this money thing is you've paid the person, presumably with some belief that they can do some aspect of this better than you can. Meaning there's no reason to hire Peter Sandhill if I say that he's a fool and has no business doing any of this, and I'm not going to work with him. Then, of course, I wouldn't do anything that he said because that's my belief. But if I default to truth and believe the Human Awareness Institute facilitators, that they are committed to my well-being, that this is all about love and this and that and the other, and I believe all that, then when he's arguing passionately why I should take 3 times more drugs than certainly I've never taken any, and I have a sensitive body, and I know all the reasons why going cautious would be advisable. And you will not find a single bit of data anywhere in the literature that says, by the way, when your therapeutic patient says, I'm scared of being out of control or da-da-da, you should force them to take more drugs than they want to take. And, just keep at it until you've convinced them to overstep their own boundaries, because that's what's best for the patient. It's not good for the patient. That's what's good for Peter's ego. And the damaging action is the fallout, meaning that overdose then leads to a complete inability to maintain a sense of who I am, which then leads to inappropriately having no boundaries, which then leads to falling in love with my therapist, who then doesn't have any boundaries either. And then that action, and then the message that I should be pocketed away and buried as a dirty secret because you are not valuable. I'm valuable. The Human Awareness Institute is valuable. We're valuable. But you weren't worth studying for, you weren't worth learning, you weren't worth taking the time, you weren't worth donating it. And this is another interesting thing, around the money. I repeatedly, once I fell in love with Peter Sandhill, I asked him more than 5 times in the session, please, Peter, take money out of this. Let this be a love exchange. Take money out of this work. Because this is no longer therapy. This is now a therapist who's attracted to their patient, who's escalating a sexual relationship under the influence, and then charging to be a prostitute, which is illegal. Because if you say, no, I'm a prostitute, etc., that's illegal. But it's also not healthy. And so the challenge for a wife who has chosen to be silent around abuse for whatever, some time, is that they feel like a fool. So I have 2 narratives. I have Peter's narrative, which is that he's this amazingly generous healer and he's done everything imaginable for my benefit. And I have Hai's narrative that says this is nothing to do with us and we're not going to apologize or do anything different to help you. We're not even going to fire Peter. We're just going to pretend like nothing has happened, because that's how unimportant this phenomenon is. The fact that it's devastated doesn't matter. This is our position. Now, on my side, I feel terrible. I've never felt so terrible in my life. Now, if I go along with their narrative, then I'm being really big and mature, because I've accepted that my feelings were immature. That in fact, there's no abuse here, nothing's wrong, and I shouldn't be treated any better, and that this was just an act of love. Which way do I choose? And this is the trap when a cultural ranking system ranks you for being smart, but doesn't rank you for being a human being. Now, to say that I have been hoodwinked, lied to, and betrayed by all of the people I trusted most is to say that I'm not a genius the way some people seem to be saying. You can't say that's a genius thing to do. I'm not intelligent. You can't say that's an intelligent thing to do, to hire a bunch of people to abuse you. That's not intelligent. That's foolhardy. So who do I want to be? Big and magnanimous or a fool? Well, there's fools all around. Only a fool, knowing the statistics, would sexually abuse their client. Only a fool would make, I told Peter Sandhill I was recording the whole 10-hour session and did. What kind of a fool, if they're going to abuse their patient, sits around and makes a recording of it? So there's foolishness all around. But the difficulty when I'm already feeling small and worthless is to say, not only do none of these people value me enough to treat me with the dignity and respect that leads me to feel like I'm valuable, but I didn't treat myself that way. I was a fool. Maybe I should have done more. Maybe I should have read 5 books instead of only 3 books before doing this session. Maybe I should have believed the government that said that all consciousness expanding substances are horrible things, and have no redeeming values. Maybe and there's of course that cultural backlash as well. Well, you broke the law. You did drugs, you hired someone involved with sexuality as your therapist, you fool. But that's the trap. Do I want to feel grandiose at this time that I'm feeling most small and say, no, I knew it all was going on? Or do I want to say, no, I clearly do not have the discerning ability to tell who has my interest at heart in therapy, because I've made so many mistakes that have made things worse under the influence of therapists who don't know what they're doing. Well, this adds then a new fear, because if I can pretend that my therapists know what they're doing, and I acknowledge that I don't, I need help, and that's an important thing to acknowledge when you're suicidal, is you need help. Well, if you need help and the cult says go to therapists, and you admit the fact that your therapists don't know what they're doing, then you're screwed. And it's like, well, I'm all alone again. Well, I don't want to be alone. So what do I want to believe that my therapists know what they're doing. I want to believe that so that I can get help and the belief that things will get better. But how can I believe that if I admit that my therapist is so foolish and so sociopathic that even 4 years after admitting to 14 accounts of abuse, finally under the threat of being sued otherwise, Peter Sandhill never offered a refund? And that's pretty basic. You go into Best Buy and they smash up your laptop with a hammer and they give you a new laptop and apologize profusely. But not therapists. No, they'll talk about we had things to work out together. Now, you had to pay me so that we could work things out together. I had issues, you had issues. But you have to pay me to work out your issues, and you have to pay me so that I can work out my issues with you, and you have to pay for the mistakes that I made, and you have to pay for all the ripple effects. And so the money, if you've paid someone, what you've said to yourself is, I believe in this person. And if you reframe that to say, no, I've been abused, I've been scammed, then the reframing says, I wasn't smart enough to catch the scam, which takes a hit to my ego, which is the part that's desperately trying to stay above water from those deep feelings of childhood inadequacy that are partitioned away at the time that the infant understands that they don't matter, that certain ranking systems matter, and that the only way they're going to get even an illusion of being treated with dignity and respect is to climb the ranking systems higher than most other people, and then they will be valued not for their humanity, but for their rank, their competency, their money, their fame, their political influence. You can be a Rush Limbaugh, talking endlessly, addicted to OxyContin. You can be overweight and all of that, as long as you have important political influence. Then all the politicians will come and pay tribute to you. Or you can be just an ordinary person asking your city what you can do to help homelessness, and they won't respond to the email because you're just a human being caring about other human beings. You don't have the clout for the next election, you see. And so this is all the disease. You are not valuable. Your rank is. Now, the damaging action, the overdose, the confusion being strung along, the fact that when my heart was broken, I couldn't build my house, the fact that my body suffered a collapse when the human awareness facilitators told me that unlike the 30 or so promises they'd all made to be committed to a world where everyone won, that they were also committed to secrecy and covering up the sexual abuse without an apology, because presumably their attorney said if you apologize for this, then he may feel better and understand that he mattered. But you've put yourself on the hook legally, you see? And you should worry about your legal standing more than you value your therapeutic client. He's just a human being, but these are houses we're talking about. This is money. These are the important things that hold our culture together. And you don't want to risk that for some human being. Are human beings really that important? This is my advice to you as a legal counsel. Protect your assets. Screw human beings. You abuse them? Yeah, that happens sometimes. My job is to protect your assets, not your soul, not your spirituality. Because this is actually asking and advising someone to be a sociopath. Makes good legal sense to be a sociopath as long as you believe that as long as the abuse doesn't hit you, it's just not that important. But this is a lie. This is one layer after another of messaging that says you are not valuable, your money, your status, your rank, your reputation. All the trappings are elevated above the essence, the human being, that gave birth to all the trappings. Kind of like the golden goose and the golden, with the goose that lays the golden eggs. The whole moral of the story was the goose was more important than the golden eggs, because if you killed the goose, where would the next eggs come from? All of the things that we think are so important in our cult were created by human beings. Money, medicine, houses, they're all created by human beings. Human beings are the golden geese, and the trappings are the eggs. But we learn in this very bizarre and self-destructive cultural insanity that the eggs are more important than the people. And so, particularly if they don't have any eggs, just get rid of them, get rid of them. Now, the damaging action, there is a deep-seated warrior and healthy defense in every human being. Every child, when they were hit by their parents or guzzled alcohol so they'd sleep or whatever it was, every child that was abused in some way flailed out and said, I don't like this. And in general, that was crushed through superior force. We've got the power of the law, of the money. We can choose to abandon you in a corner of the house where no one can hear you. We can put pillows over your face. We can tease and humiliate you into silence. We can get you to talk the way we think would make our family look good in the community and to stop talking about these things that make us look terrible. We can do all that. We can ground you. We can do all this stuff to protect our little fiefdom of our public image and our social rank. We can do all that. And this gets into what I would call fighting the self-protection. You have a regressed therapeutic patient in a suicidal state who needs help. You've got a vertical relationship, and they want to say, no, these kind of drugs, that's too much drugs. That doesn't feel safe. No, you're going to do this. So the next thing is you have the abuse of scale or power to violate the self-protection. The self-protection. To communicate that part is inadequate to defend itself and that there will be more pain coming if you fight than if you go along with it. This ties into so much of the gray areas of sexual abuse in our culture. If you listen to the Harvey Weinstein interviews with some of the women, they understand